This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com. And today, as my special guest, I have the author of When It Was My Life on Both Sides of the Camera. He is a wrestling photographer, boxing photographer for decades now, Scott Romer, and he's photographed a lot of unusual angles and big matches, and he's going to share a lot of these stories with us. The link for this book is in the description of this video, by the way, and it is at Amazon. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing wonderful, Hannibal. I can't wait to do this interview with you. And by the way, you've got my sympathy for the loss of your grandmother.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a very hard few weeks dealing with that. But as far as your photography career, how did you get into combat sports photography?
Well, I was always a wrestling fan, of course, from the time I started watching TV. And I was diagnosed as hyperactive by a psychiatrist in my preteens, and the doctor suggested that I go to wrestling matches to take out my aggression. And my grandfather was the one that would take me to wrestling shows dating back all the way to 1968. And that was the WWA, Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder's territory.
Oh, so that was in which promotion in LA, or was that in the Midwest? Or
no, Bruiser and Snyder had purchased the WWA, and that was the Indianapolis version of it.
Okay, because I remember Fred Blassie was WWA champion when they called it that promotion, WWA in LA. Is that right?
That's right. That was when I think Roy Shires had the territory. I believe. I'm not sure right now.
Yeah, it was either Roy Shire or Mike LaBelle.
Right.
Because I think Shire had San Francisco, but they worked with LA. So I'm not very familiar with the Bruiser's territory, other than the incident where Bruiser Brody reportedly had a confrontation with him backstage. Could you tell us a little bit about that territory?
Well, that was in Peoria, Illinois. And the match, the time before, Bruiser had shorted Brody on a paycheck. And after a match in Peoria, Illinois, as Bruiser was walking up the stairs to the dressing room, Brody sucker punched him. They got into a brawl. Bruiser had his back of his head busted open. And Bruiser said to Brody, "When I get up, I'm going to kill you." And Brody left the arena still in his wrestling gear.
Wow, didn't know that part of this story. Was Bruiser really as big of a drinker as his character showed? Not Bruiser Brody, Dick the Bruiser.
Bruiser liked his Japanese beer. He only drank Japanese beer, the Koran beer. Is that how you pronounce it?
I haven't been to Japan. You are, so you have been, as we're going to talk about later.
Well, wait a second. I got one thing to say. People assume that I've been in Japan because I worked with Japan's Gong Wrestling magazine. I never went to Japan. I covered matches all over the United States, Puerto Rico, and Canada, but I never made it out to Japan.
Very interesting. Well, we may as well get into this now. I put it as the screenshot of this video. You were the one that covered and took the photos for that infamous angle where Invader #1, Jose Gonzalez, stabbed the Japanese wrestler. This was just after Bruiser Brody's murder, and they were going to do an angle based on those photos in Japan, but it was in such bad taste that apparently there was terrible feedback, and the angle ended up getting nixed. I believe you even have some pictures from that haven't really been seen before too to show us, but I'll let you get into the whole story, how you were contacted about doing that, where they were shot, what the initial idea was for the angle and so forth.
I had two Japanese agents. One was Wally Yamaguchi, and the other one was Jimmy Suzuki. Jimmy was just in town the day before yesterday, and we had dinner and caught up with some wrestling talk, and it was really a great time. But anyhow, 1990, 2 years after the stabbing, I was contacted by Jimmy Suzuki, and he asked me if I wanted to go to Puerto Rico to photograph an angle. He never told me exactly what it was. So I flew out to Puerto Rico. Onita picks me up at the airport, and Jimmy was with us, and we headed to a TV studio. They didn't tell me anything what was going to go on. And as soon as I walked into the office, there was Jose Gonzalez, Carlos Colon, and Victor Quinones. And my heart started beating. And they set up an angle where Onita was signing a contract, and Gonzalez was going to sign the contract to go to Japan to wrestle Onita for a big payday. And they did the beat up pictures, and a fight broke out. Of course, that was a work. Onita gigs his head, and everybody leaves the studio, leaving me, Jimmy Suzuki, Onita, and there were other Japanese photographers that were on board on the shoot, but they were not there when the stabbing, when they were not taking pictures while the stabbing was taking place. And it wasn't Gonzalez stabbing Onita. It was Onita gigging his stomach and trying to draw a lot of blood to make it appear that he had been stabbed. And Onita gigged his stomach. Not a lot of blood came out. I'm the only one photographing what's going on. And there was a lot of blood from the forehead wound that dripped onto the floor. And I told Onita to just scoop up the blood and put it on your shirt and on your chest to make it appear that you had been stabbed. I knew what he was trying to do, and he did. So I'm taking pictures of all this, and one of the photographers pulls down a fire alarm, and that drew the attention of the police. An ambulance and a fire truck came, and they actually detained me to and asked me what I saw. And of course, I was like Sergeant Schultz in Hogan's Heroes. I saw nothing. And Onita was taken away on a stretcher to the hospital. And when the doctor looked at him, the doctor's saying, you know, you're not hurt, you know, you don't even need stitches or anything like that. Onita insisted to get stitches, and the doctor put one stitch in. Then we were driven back to the hotel in a limousine, and I gave the film to Jimmy Suzuki, who flew out from Puerto Rico to Miami to ship the film overnight to Japan. And the next morning, we get a fax from Japan with the whole thing, the whole stabbing angle on the front cover of the newspaper. And it stated that Jose Gonzalez had tried to stab and murder Onita. And about a week later, I get a Gong Wrestling magazine. It's covered. That whole stabbing thing's covered. And it's got my name listed as the only photographer of the shoot, photos by Scott Romer. Well, I didn't really think a lot after that, but a couple of years later, I was photographing a WrestleMania when it came to Indianapolis, and I ran into Stu Hart, who I had done some photo shoots a few years earlier, and I reintroduced myself and told him who I was. And he says, "Oh, you're the one that photographed that stabbing angle." And he's telling me that that angle was done because they were going to bring Gonzalez into Japan with the assumption that he was going to wrestle, but the Yakuza was going to take care of Gonzalez and make him disappear. So that really got me kind of upset, you know, always looking behind my back to see if anyone's going to come after me. Well, through Kayfabe Memories, the website kayfabememories.com, it's not as popular as it used to be. I reached out to Jose Gonzalez and told him, you know, how I didn't know what was going to happen. And, you know, I had no idea. And that I'm actually innocent of it because, you know, with that kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? With that kind of stabbing angle, you know, I thought maybe the mafia or the Puerto Rican mob was going to come after me and kill me. So I was always looking over my back, and it upset me. But nothing ever became of it. The match never took place because the press was so against the idea, and that whole thing really kind of went down the toilet. But I've got some pictures that have never been seen before of the stabbing angle, and I'd like to share them with you and the fans out there. So this is the beginning of the stabbing angle, and that's Jose gouging out Onita's eyes. Here's another one, and that's in the back is Victor Quinones, and he was part owner of the World, what do they call it? What's that? WWC.
World Wrestling Council.
Yeah, World Wrestling Council. And he was actually behind it as well, but Gonzalez didn't know that. Here's one of Onita laying on the ground with the blood that's on the floor that we scooped up. And here's another one. Now the trash can's turned over. You know, we had to decorate the floor and the, you know, with the garbage can being turned over, add to the effects. And here's the ambulance taking Onita to the hospital. And then the next day, I drove to a spot show in Puerto Rico with Pogo, and Jose was on the show, and I was hanging out in the heel dressing room in Puerto Rico. Gonzalez and Carlos Colon and the Puerto Ricans were, a lot of the Puerto Ricans were babyface, and the Americans and the Japanese were the heels. So I was in the Japanese dressing room when one of the agents with WWC came over to me and said, Jose Gonzalez wants to see you el pronto. So I marched over to the other side of the building where his dressing room was, and he took me into the shower area with the towel over his hand. My heart is beating. I don't know what the hell he's doing, but he asked me how I liked the angle. And I said, man, that was a great angle. You know, I'm nervous looking at him straight in the eye, not knowing what he's going to do to me. And he said, I hear you were married to Dick the Bruiser's daughter. And I told him I was. And he told me about when he worked with Dick the Bruiser in 1969 when he first started. So I got the hell out of the dressing room. But what surprised me was the popularity of Jose Gonzalez in Puerto Rico. And here's a picture of the fans mobbing him after his match with Kim Duck. We were going to use this in the book, but John Cosper thought it was too controversial, and it would upset a lot of people. And here's Jose with his championship belt. And then this was done after the stabbing angles, the same day. It's Pogo, the late Pogo, and Onita and myself. And as you could see, Onita was fine. So that's the story.
Do you think that was just kind of a rib on you, that he took you in the shower with the towel over his hand just to kind of freak you out, or do you think it wasn't intentional?
No, it was intentional. He was ribbing me from it and capitalizing on what he had done. and wanting to make me nervous.
What did you think about him as a person from that short time you worked with him?
Well, he was polite and nice, but we all know what happened. I felt very uncomfortable being around him, and I made my time with him very limited. I ran back to the other dressing room where I was safe.
And there is some pictures in your book, of course. Those are just a few. The one of Onita being carried off, and the actual magazine pictures and so forth for people that want to see them in the book. There's also pictures of Bruiser Brody in here, who you took a lot of photos of over the years. What were your thoughts on Brody?
Brody was great, and he respected me because I was I was working with the Japanese magazine, and that was where he was really popular. We went out many times after the matches to get a drink, to get something to eat, and he allowed me to take pictures around, driving him around town, which made the Japanese magazines. And he was always very nice to me and told me how he hated Gagne, and just small talk, about the business and about his family. And we got along very, very well.
What was the issue with Brody and Gagne? Because I know he left a little abruptly from that territory, similar to Stan Anson, but he never destroyed the belt or anything, but they didn't get along. But I don't know the backstory.
Well, I don't know about the backstory, but Gagne had run a show in Indianapolis, and it only drew like 500 people. It was terrible. Brody was on the show, and Brody wrestled Jim Bronzell that night, and the match never made it to the ring. Brody just took it out into the aisle, and it only lasted a minute or two. And as we were driving around after the show, Brody was laughing, saying how he fucked Gagne over. And he's telling me his payday was going to be probably $75 to $100 after his expenses. And he would, he just wished he stayed in San Antonio with his wife and son. And he was just saying, fuck Gagne. Did you see how I did that? And he was laughing about it.
Yeah, I've heard that if he didn't like promoters, he would do stuff like that, or just sit in a headlock for an entire match. Or Bobby Heenan, who I guess you knew pretty well, tells a story that I guess he threw like a bucket full of vomit or something in the ring at one point for a show that went bad, from what Heenan says. But I know you probably know Heenan well from the Indianapolis territory. Any stories about him? Probably the greatest manager of all time.
I really didn't know Heenan that well. Heenan kind of kayfabed me because I was just a photographer. But after my divorce with Bruiser, or no, I was working with Gong Magazine, and I was the only photographer that WWF at the time would allow up to the ring. I was shooting the matches with Steve Taylor, who was their official photographer, and Steve would take me up to the party at the bar after the matches, where all the WWF stars were, including Vince McMahon. He introduced me around David Schultz and Vince McMahon, and then Heenan started talking to me, and he was telling me how nutty Dick the Bruiser was, and how he treated his son, and he saw him abuse his son a few times. And I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. What was your question? How well did I know Heenan? Or
just any insight into Heenan, which you are giving us.
Yes, Heenan and I then, and that was in 1984. In the early 90s, Heenan was a special guest for Women of Wrestling, and I hooked up with Heenan after the show in California, in LA, and we sat down and had drinks and laughed, and hugged, and again, he was just telling me basically his life story about, and that was how he disliked Dick the Bruiser. A few months later, Pepper Gomez died, and I called Heenan up and told him about Pepper Gomez dying, and that was when he was telling me about his throat cancer, and he was sounding a lot different. And then, of course, that took its toll on him, and you couldn't even tell it was Bobby Heenan the last 7-8 years of his life. So that's
I saw him a couple of years before he died at a convention, and it was hard talking to him, seeing him suffer like that. But he kept doing appearances right till the end.
He had a lot of respect for the business and a lot of dignity, and he wanted to see his fans before he died.
I'll mix in a few fan questions here. Corey Martin says he's an Indiana boy, and he's wondering if you've ever taken pictures in Fort Wayne.
Yes, I did, at the Fort Wayne Coliseum, where Dick the Bruiser ran shows. And I remember they had a real tough police chief in that area who I was told not to fuck with, which I wouldn't do anyways. But yes, I'm very familiar with the Fort Wayne Coliseum. And I was a wrestler / manager for Dick the Bruiser, and Bruiser ran shows where I also managed and wrestled at the Coliseum. When I was doing it, the town was pretty much down. His organization was falling apart at that time, but I can remember big crowds at the Fort Wayne Coliseum.
Super Liger wants to know what you think about Antonio Inoki's reputation as a shooter.
I've only met Antonio Inoki one time, and that was in Calgary, Canada, when he co-promoted Stampede Wrestling with their once-a-year show with Stu Hart. He has a mixed style of wrestling, and some of it is to stretch the opponent when he was active, and of course, and he owned a promotion. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a more or less semi-shoot style that they wrestled. I don't think anybody really was trying to kill people, but they worked very stiff in his promotion.
Steve wants to know what's the craziest picture you've ever taken in wrestling. I guess that depends on your definition of crazy.
Well, you know, the Sheik was crazy, and he would chase me around ringside. David McLean of Glow and Women of Wrestling fame was my best friend, and he shot with me. And we followed the Sheik back into the dressing room, and I took a picture of the Sheik, and he put his hand up like that, and then he started chasing me around, and I ran out to the crowd. And when I got back to the not the dressing room, but the backstage area, he had David McLean trapped between one of those big trash containers and making faces. And David, he was scared shitless.
Yeah, and there is a good picture of the Sheik in your book, among others. One of my top 3 favorite wrestlers of all time. Did he always kayfabe you?
No. When I took that picture at Dave Kennerly's territory, you know, Bearman in Canada. I had driven up with Bobo Brazil and Louis Martinez, and that was really the first time that I met the Sheik, where he was, you know, a normal acting human being, and he was very nice to me, and he you know, played it up so I could get some good pictures like the one I used in the book.
So he was a nice guy in real life, I guess. But
to me, yes, to me. He also gave me his number, and I would call him up to find out what matches he had, so I could relay that to Gong Wrestling Magazine in Japan to see if they wanted me to to cover the territory. But he was in his 60s and pretty much shot at that time of taking that picture.
Have you heard that he was the most attacked heel of all time in wrestling?
I'm sorry, the most what?
Attacked heel of all time.
Attacked by
fans.
No, I wasn't. You know, I've heard all kinds of stories about wrestlers being stabbed. Freddie Blassie. I can't remember all of them, but a lot of those old timers have some good stories. You know, the riot with Ox Baker and Johnny Powers, and at the end of that, you could see a fan throw a chair and hit Ox in the back of the head.
Yeah, I met Johnny Powers back in 2007. He had me over for dinner one night. Very nice guy. He kind of disappeared off the face of the earth, though, in recent years.
Well, I've seen a couple pictures of him, current pictures of him, and he's still alive as far as I know.
Yeah, the last I've heard is he's living in Hamilton, Ontario.
Okay, that's right up in your neck of the woods, I guess, being in Canada. I don't know how far it is from your hometown, but you know, one of the things that I used to do early on was at-home pictures. I did them for the magazines. I did at home with one of the Canadians, Sergeant Jacques Goulet, Rene Goulet. That was one of my first big published stories in Bill Apter's magazine. I did at home with Ox Baker, and that made Wrestling News and Ring Wrestling Magazine. And I was going to do one with Gene Kaninsky and as well as Don Leo Jonathan, but it never really happened.
Dan Masters, who's the ring announcer for PCW Ultra up in LA, says he's a childhood friend of David McLean, or
Yes.
You being a childhood friend had to be interesting. Do you have any stories?
With David McLean or of Dan? I'm very friendly.
Well, both, I guess you could, but mostly David.
Dan was the color commentator for Women of Wrestling, and I met him at Cauliflower Alley Club, and he's a heck of a nice guy. And you know, David McLean and I went to grade school together. We played basketball, we played tennis, we were on the baseball team. I played football for my grade school. David didn't, but we were. And there's a whole article and narration in my book from David McLean. So that's another reason to get my book. But David was a heck of an athlete, a real good basketball player. And in 1987, 88, he started, no, it was before that, 1986, he started Glow, Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling. Before that, he was promoting concerts. So David has done a really good job for himself and is very successful and very well received. His partner in Women of Wrestling is Jeannie Buss, who is the owner of the LA Lakers.
Interesting. Well, maybe you could hook me up with an interview with David someday, because I actually am a fan of women's wrestling, and I'd love to talk to him about it.
I would be glad to do that, Devon. No problem at all.
So there's a picture in here of you with Road Warrior Animal in your book, and of course, Animal suddenly passed away not too long ago. I mean, I just heard from him a few days before. Any thoughts on his passing and memories of the Road Warriors, who I'm sure you've covered over the years?
Well, you know, Road Warriors started out in 1983 working with Georgia Championship Wrestling. And they were staying at the same hotel I was staying at. And we sat out at the pool. They allowed me to take pictures, and they were very cooperative with Paul Ellering as their manager. Now, a lot of people didn't know that, or they didn't know that I was manager Saul Creechman on Chicago Wrestling with Bob Luce. That was WWA. They were working with the AWA at the time, and we were both staying at the Hyatt Regency. Bruiser's show came on for a half hour on one channel, and Gagne had an hour-long show after Bruiser's show, or maybe it was before Bruiser, I don't know. But so they saw both shows, and they saw that I was also a manager in wrestling, and I had a tag team called the World Warriors. Now, that was not my idea to name them that. The World Warriors were Mad Max and Super Max, or Sammy DeCero and John Richmond. Sammy DeCero was the promoter and owner of Windy City Wrestling, but they wanted to challenge my team. You know, they were very kind of insulted when they saw me as the manager, but they got over it. And you know, I'd run into Animal on a lot of occasions, and he was very, very polite, and he allowed me to do photo shoots with photo ops with he and the fans at one of the promotions, and everything was forgiven. And it was a tragic situation that he had died. It was on his anniversary, I guess, and she was a very lovely lady, and it was so shocking that you know, he had posted pictures on Facebook, and then the next day he's gone. So these are some of the trials and tribulations that go on in wrestling, and it never stops. The wrestlers have punished their bodies, and back in the day were doing a lot of drugs, and it takes its toll on them. Look what happened to Henning and you know, and Hawk and David Von Erich. That was one of my territories as well, was shooting the Von Erich's territory, world-class championship wrestling. So you bond with the guys, and then, you know, they open their arms to you, your friends, and then, you know, and then they die. It's very sad, and I never get used to it when I hear about it, one of the Ring Warriors passing away.
Were you aware of the Von Erich boys' drug problems when you were covering World Class Championship Wrestling, or was it something that was covered up fairly well?
Well, it was covered up, but I would go out after the matches in St. Louis with David Von Erich, and he downed a lot of drinks, and I've seen him wasted on more than one occasion. I mean, wasted out of his mind. So I don't know what he was on, but he drank, and I guess did whatever, and still always a good guy to be with, though. But when I say be with them, that's that one time that night. You don't know what they're like, you know, during the day and all that other stuff. But I've seen it, and I've seen you know, Kerry Von Erich wasted, and you know, and I never saw Mike wasted, and I never saw Kevin Von Erich wasted, but Kerry and David were the big partiers.
Are you surprised that they put Mike in the WWE Hall of Fame when there's so many legends that aren't in there? I'm not going to even get into starting to name them, but Mike he was a Von Erich, but he wasn't really that accomplished of a wrestler.
Didn't they put them all in at the same time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess that's like killing 3 birds with one stone, you know. And Chris Von Erich wrestled for a very short time, but he wasn't included, or maybe he was. But no, if it wasn't the whole family being inducted in the Hall of Fame, then Mike Von Erich, in my opinion, does not belong in the WWE Hall of Fame by any means.
As far as the popularity level of the Von Erichs, I've heard people say at their peak, I mean, including I've heard Steve Austin say this, that they were as popular as, if not even more than Hulk Hogan was in that territory. How would you rate their popularity compared to other big baby faces?
Well, in their hometown, it was just unbelievable. And you don't hear the screaming and wrestling with that high pitch nowadays that you saw in the old days of wrestling. And when they came out from the dressing room, it tore down the building. It was unbelievable, and that brought goosebumps to me when I was in the middle of that and photographing them. And I'm so glad I got to experience that.
I mean, we see it on the Thunderdome that it's mostly middle to older men watching wrestling now. It's unfortunate that it's not as much the younger fans and the teenage girls as we saw in the 80s. As you said, that high-pitched scream, or if you watch Billy Graham walk out in Madison Square Garden with no music, and he called it pandemonium, but it was pandemonium. You hear them going nuts, and I can't remember the last time I've seen that in wrestling.
It's been a while, and we're talking a long while. We're talking 25 years. We're talking when Vince McMahon ruined the territories. That's when the noise stopped. But I would have to say I was able to work with WWF on many occasions around the United States. And when Hulk Hogan came out to, what is that song? The American, whatever it was.
Real American, I think.
Real American. It had that high pitch. And since he's been retired, that pitch isn't there anymore. The excitement's not there. The wrestling is not there. The boys are all skinny and they all look alike in AEW, or not. You know what I'm saying. There's just skinny people, and
they're small. It seems like 5'7" or under is actually a benefit now in wrestling. There's very few larger in life characters. They still exist, but I hope it goes back one day. But who knows?
Only time will tell.
Now, there's a picture of Muhammad Ali that you've taken in here with his son. There's a picture of Rip Rogers boxing even. You've covered a lot of boxing. I'm not even going to go into all the boxing pictures in here. Evander Holyfield, I think Larry Holmes. How did you get into covering boxing as well? And what are some of your favorite boxing photos?
Well, that one of Muhammad Ali and his son is one of my favorite pictures. As I've got another picture of 4 champions at one time. That would be Larry Holmes, Lennox Lewis, Marvin Hagler. Shoot, I can't remember them all off the top of my head. But that picture went for $2,500 at one of the boxing convention auctions. So that I donated the picture to. I've been able to work with Muhammad Ali on many occasions, and his picture is actually that one that you see in my book was hanging on his wall in his house. That was one of his more favorite pictures. I worked in a boxing office in Indianapolis. My best friend is Fred Burns, and he was a Indiana boxing promoter, and we built records up of the fighters. And then after they got a decent record, and Fred's fighters, most of them couldn't really fight a lick, but we had the illusion that they were going to be world champions. We had good crowds. We did shows on the riverboats, and boxing, I've got the same stories in boxing that I have in wrestling, the crazy stuff on the road. And so I've been blessed to work both ends of wrestling and boxing. I've even boxed myself, and I can't fight a lick. And I turned Rip Rogers pro, and one of his opponents was Cody Cox, who was the National Tough Man Contest winner. And Rip got paid a real good paycheck on that one. And he took Cody Cox. Why do we want to fight? Why do we want to hurt each other? And he taught Cody some moves to make it look real, and Rip never got hurt, and Cody knocked Rip out, and I think the second round, and everybody went home with a good payday on that one.
Do you think Rip had any potential as a boxer? It's just a big payday for him.
Well, he was in his 40s when he started, and it was a good gimmick. I have several fighters that were professional wrestlers in their day. One of them being Skip Radisson, who's still wrestling in the local circuit. I was able to make them 10 times, 20 times more money on one fight than they were able to make in wrestling in their whole entire career, practically.
Wow. As far as the Sportatorium, wrestling fan has a question for you. Is it true that the girls were lined up from the back entrance of the Sportatorium to the chain link fence at the Pepsi plant for the Von Erichs?
Absolutely. There were tons and tons of fans, of women fans, that were attracted to the Von Erichs, that would be willing to give their body to them anytime, any place, anywhere. So yes, I shot David Von Erich's funeral. I wasn't able to get into the church, and that was in Fort Worth, Texas. And they had a loudspeaker for the service, and there were probably 5,000 people outside of the church. And as well, it's like the Kennedy hearse driving down the highway, and there were fans, lined up on the highway and on the streets to see the hearse go by. That's how popular they were.
That reminds me of the Queen here in Canada when she's visited my town, just to get a glimpse, people lining up on the streets of her driving by. Hurricane Maverick wants to know, who is the best boxer you've ever seen?
Well, in my day, in my peak, I was shooting Oscar De La Hoya. I think the most popular and colorful one was my favorite, and that's Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, Muhammad was definitely one of the most colorful. I think that's what's missing in MMA right now, is a colorful character to kind of give it a boost, because it's losing a lot of its stars lately. Have you covered much MMA?
I have. And one of Rip Rogers' opponents was Monty Cox. Are you familiar with Monty? He's a Hall of Fame MMA. He's in the MMA Hall of Fame. And he's also a very good friend of mine. And he's also done some narration in that book. On the back cover is me getting knocked out in a boxing match by Monty Cox. So take a look at that. Maybe show it to the fans. I'm sorry, what was your question? I've been hitting the head.
Who the best boxer was, and you, as you said, Monty Cox. A lot of people are interested in the Von Erichs. Carlos Ray wants to know if you believe the Von Erichs were cursed.
Well, that legend has it that they were, and they had us. At 6 years old, there was a Jack Atkinson Jr. or something like that. He died. He was electrocuted. And then David died in Japan, 1983, and was found dead by Bruiser Brody. And Bruiser Brody told me that he had flushed drugs down the toilet before the police came. And then there was Mike Von Erich Mike Von Erich that died, committed suicide, and then Kerry, who had a bad drug problem, committed suicide. That's a curse if I ever saw one.
Now, Harley Race is very popular on this channel. There's a great picture in here of a magazine, of Harley that you took here that made the front cover. Do you have any stories about Harley Race that you could share with us, and maybe his legendary toughness that we always hear about?
Well, I drove with Harley Race when I shot down in Kansas City, and he would drive 100 miles an hour during a snowstorm. It didn't matter. I was also able to manage Harley Race on my first time on TV as a manager. Bruiser brought him into the WWA, and Harley had an ability to throw his voice. Because I was managing, I could hear what was going on, but it sounded like it was from the other end of the ring, the way he had that talent to do it. I was also able to represent Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazine and present Harley Race with the 1983 Wrestler of the Year award, which was quite an honor. There was I think that was at the Checker Dome, and there were, well over 10,000 people at that show. I shot a lot of Harley Race's fights, matches. He was the St. Louis, the Missouri heavyweight champion, as well as winning the NWA heavyweight championship 8 times in his career. And then we reconnected at Cauliflower Alley Club, and by that time his body was giving up on him.
Yeah, I've met him numerous times. The last time I saw him was, I think, 2014, and he was on the automatic chair by then that you would drive around, but he was chain smoking. I think
Yes.
After his wife passed, his chain smoking grew even worse than it had been.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, sorry. Finish your Harley story, because I'm going to ask you about some.
Justin Race was a collegiate wrestler, his son. When he was in grade school, he was on the grade school wrestling team. And I went with Harley Race to watch his son wrestle. And I took a group picture of the whole team with Harley, and gave Harley the pictures to pass out an autograph for each one of the kids.
And you mentioned Cauliflower Alley. I think this picture here is from Cauliflower Alley. Dr. Jerry Graham Jr., a good friend of mine. Terry Funk, one of my all-time favorite wrestlers. Definitely in that top 5, I guess you could say. And you're in there with them. Any stories about Terry Funk or the original Dr. Jerry Graham?
Well, I never met the original Dr. Jerry Graham, although Jerry Graham Jr. had the blessings of Dr. Jerry Graham to use the name, and he had managed him a few times. Terry Funk and I, we go back. I've been able to work out with him at before shows, and get to know him. Also in that picture was El Bracero, Jose Martinez, and it was Dr. Jerry Graham and Jose Martinez that sort of took me under their wing and taught me a few holds. And Jerry Graham Jr. is the promoter, was the promoter for Powerbomb Championship Wrestling, and in 2011. He asked me to work with him, and I became the manager for Powerbomb Championship Wrestling, which had really good, strong TV. So all of those people in that picture have a place in my heart. And again, it's such an honor to be a part of the business and to keep my name active. Here I am almost 50 years later after my first show. And, I'm with the best video guy in the business, and that's you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Steve wants to know if you've ever hung out with Randy Savage or the Ultimate Warrior.
Well, if you look in my book, there's a picture of Randy Savage and I. I was the official photographer and still am for the National Italian American Sports Hall of Fame in Chicago. It's a big museum, and it's called the Jerry Coangelo National Italian American Sports Hall of Fame on Taylor Street. In 2000, two, after 9/11, they honored Angelo Poffo and Macho Man Poffo, and it was um, what's his name? The other brother. Why can't I? Lanny.
Lanny Poffo.
Leaping Lanny, who I saw. I saw you. I saw that slapping incident.
Yeah, we don't get along too well anymore.
Right. But I've been able to work with Randy when he was working with Jarrett Territory in Memphis, and then when I was photographing the WWF, I've worked with him on many occasions, and he was good. He was all right. Get the book because it's got a great picture of me and Macho Man Savage in it too.
There's been a few fans on here that have wanted to know who were some of the most difficult wrestlers to deal with. I've interviewed other photographers too, such as Bill Apter and George Napolitano, or however you pronounce his name. And they said some you really had to hound to get the photographs, and others like Billy Graham, I've heard, were very easy to get to pose.
Bill would give me assignments to photograph what matches and to do pose pictures of who. And to be honest with you, they all knew that I was a journalist working with Bill Apter's magazine and Gong magazine in Japan. Once I said who I was, I never had a problem with anybody.
Very interesting. There was another fan on here that wanted to know, how was Ric Flair to work with?
Oh, Rick was great. Rick was styling and profiling, and he was always a pleasure to photograph, always very polite. There's a picture of me at dinner with Ric Flair as well. And Rick was just a crazy, fun person. Always liked to buy everybody drinks. That's why he didn't have a lot. He didn't have a lot of money. He's blown a lot. And he just loved partying, and he loved business, and he loves life. You can't knock a guy for doing that.
There's a picture in here of my most popular shoot interview, almost 4 million views, is the Honky Tonk Man, who was a regular in Great North Wrestling during our beginning years. Any stories about him?
Well, Wayne and I have been together. I managed him on many shows, and one time I was driving with him and Rip Rogers, and Rip needed to go to the store or something like that, and it was in a thunderstorm, and Honky Tonk Man purposely pulled over in the biggest puddle that he could find, so Rip would step in the puddle just as a rib. But Rip said, "What the fuck are you doing? Move over to where it's dry, motherfucker." And he did. But I thought that was humorous. And Honky Tonk's always personable and very warm to me whenever he sees me. And he's just a great, great person, and the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time.
Isban wants to know if you've ever done photography in the Boston Garden.
No, I haven't. Nope. That's one area that I never shot. I know that that was Vince Sr.'s territory at one time, when he owned the WWF. But I never shot that. I never shot Madison Square Garden either.
Dusan wants to know if you have any good rib stories or keeping kayfabe moments.
Oh boy, let's see. There's rib stories. Well, my father-in-law, which we haven't mentioned yet, was Dick the Bruiser, and when I got out of the wrestling business, I sold motorcycles for my dad, and I every once in a while, somebody needing money would come in and sell their bike real cheap, and my dad didn't want it, so I bought one and I brought it home. Bruiser had called me up to he said, I live next door to Dick the Bruiser, and he called me up. He said, I think I heard someone in your garage. You better come home, see if anything's missing. And I went home, and that new bike that I had bought was missing. And I called the police. They came over, the sheriff, they came over and took a report. And the sheriff that took the report was one of Bruiser's friends. And, they said they'll get on it and they'll investigate. And I was really depressed because it took all my money to buy the thing that I thought I was going to make a lot of money on. And it was missing. And then a few days later, I'm still in the dumps, and my stepson said, Daddy, Papa Dick the Bruiser, that's what they call him. Papa Dick the Bruiser took your bike, and it's hidden in the bushes. So that was a rib. There's one in my book. Before I married Bruiser's daughter, one of the stooges for Dick the Bruiser said Scott Romer's gay. And so I ended up being the ring guy for Bruiser, setting up the ring before the shows. And I had just got done tearing down the ring. And Bruiser, when the show was over, he would leave the match. He would leave the show, pay everybody, and leave the show. But I was left alone, and I took a shower in the dressing room as I'm washing my hair and my face, getting all that nasty sweat and ring crap that you get on your body. Bruiser, somebody's taken the bar of soap out of my hand. And I clear my eyes, and it's Dick the Bruiser, and he threw it on the floor, and he was standing there completely naked. And that's in the book. And I think he was testing me to see if I was gay.
Yeah, there was a lot of, from the interviews I've done, a lot of like homosexual related ribs in those days. For the fans, there is more Von Erich pictures in the book, but there's some magazine pictures involving the Von Erichs that you've included in your book. Go ahead.
Okay, I shot both of the big Parade of Champions. That was in a memorial show in May for David Von Erich, who died. And the first one, they were both at Texas Stadium, and the first one was noted at the time for being for having the largest attending record of anybody that ran a show. There were like, I think they said 58,000 people were there.
Yeah, I do recall that. I don't think that was broken until that Toronto match between Mr. Wonderful and Hulk Hogan. Andre the Giant versus Kamala here you've shot. Fortunately, we lost Kamala. I really liked him. Any thoughts on either one of those two?
Well, Kamala and Andre the Giant, nothing really that stands out in my mind other than having the pleasure to photograph their matches.
And Bombshell Comics wants to know if you have any stories on Joe LeDuc.
I knew Joe LeDuc when he worked for Memphis, and but I never got to really know him. Just introduced to him, and photographing and taking poses of his matches. That's really it.
And as far as your social media on Facebook, where I follow you, you often post a lot of your photographs from over the years. Are you on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere else where fans can look you up?
I'm old school, man. I had a hard time working a computer, so I'm just on Facebook, and a lot of the memories, year after year, I post the wrestling pictures. And if you go to my Facebook page right now, there's lots of wrestling stuff that I've done. And yes, just go to my website or go to my Facebook page.
And Roddy Piper has some good pictures in your book. He's one of the greats, of course. Any stories about him?
Roddy Piper, not really. I knew him from Georgia Championship Wrestling, and when I shot WWF, I kept things really low key because I knew I could be out of there anytime. So I never went into the dressing room to draw attention. When I shot WWF stuff, I stayed at the ring even during intermission, uh, because I knew that, like I said, I knew that my opportunity could vanish if I went into the wrong place or pissed the wrong person off.
And speaking of WWF, there you are with the living legend Bruno Sammartino in one of the pictures from your book. Any thoughts on him? And were you surprised that after so much years of being anti WWE, every lawsuit or every scandal that came up, he was coming out adamantly against Vince McMahon? Then supposedly some large amount of money was exchanged for him to get into the Hall of Fame, and from what I've heard, it's enough to take care of his kids and grandkids. But are you surprised, being a man of such high morals, that he kind of went back to a company he had badmouthed for so long?
Well, you know, no, I'm not surprised. I think money talks and bull jive walks. That's what Ernie Ladd used to say. And you know, money can do anything. You know, make a person do anything. So I'm glad that he didn't have the animosity with the WWF towards the later years of his life, as he did, you know, as he was speaking against it. I'm glad that he got over it, and I'm glad, you know, and Vince paid him, and you know, that's, what can I say? You get the money, you'll do the talking.
Exactly. Any memories of Dino Bravo?
No, other than photographing his matches. I never met him before.
Corey is asked a couple times about Dick the Bruiser Jr. Have you ever worked with him? Of course, you were Dick's son-in-law, so I'm sure you know him.
Well, Dick the Bruiser Jr. is actually husband number 3, Tim Riplogal. He pays my ex-mother-in-law money to use that name, Dick the Bruiser Jr. He's a heck of a guy. Actually, one of my more favorite people in the business. And I got to give the guy credit. His shows really aren't the best, but he's been able to run shows consistently for over 30 years. And he's also been able to have TV for all those years as well. So somewhere along the line, he's doing something right. Where everybody else has failed, he's still active as a wrestler and on TV. And I've even managed him. And
Wow.
There was a show that he brought Spike Huber, who was husband number 1. He brought me in, and he brought and he was there, and of course my ex-wife. There's no animosity. We all get along fine. But after the show, she ended up leaving with Spike Huber, and never showed up at home again, and remarried Spike Huber, and they're happily married. They're happily married, and both of them are doing very well, and I'm glad to see that. The kids, my stepchildren, are all successful, and again, I wish them all nothing but the best. That's Spike, Michelle, Timmy, Nikki, and Mikey.
M. Cole wants to know if you have any Angelo Mosca stories.
No, sir, I don't.
What about Haku? I saw his name pop up in this feed a while ago.
Haku was a kickboxer before he came into pro wrestling. And I know that because I saw pictures of him working out when he was probably just a teenager, and kicking the punching bag and stuff. He's always been a gentleman, always cooperative. I photographed a few of his matches with the Warlord, and but nothing really out of the ordinary.
He has actually been one of the nicest wrestlers I've met. As you know, a lot of wrestlers have big egos. X Davey wants to know if you have any thoughts on Eddie Gilbert.
Eddie, who was married to Missy Hyatt, and I knew Eddie from the Memphis area, and again, he was always nice, you know, and a very good worker, an excellent worker. And I was in Mexico with his brother Doug Gilbert on tour with what was the group called? Jeez, Onita owned the group. Onita and
FMW.
It may have been. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I can't remember all the.
There was also IWA Japan that could have been.
Okay.
There's been a few people that have wanted to know, including the Howling Madness here, about if you ever knew Paul Heyman when he was a photographer and any interactions with him.
Yes, absolutely. Paul was a photographer. He started out just like me as a ringside photographer, first working with Norman Keatzer's Wrestling News and then some of the other littler magazines. He worked with Bill Apter's magazine, and then he became a big time manager. He's also Jewish, which I'm Jewish, and he's done a heck of a job for himself. I'm very proud of Paul.
Now, someone's bringing up Paul Bear here, Bill Moody. He was from that world-class territory, so I imagine you may have run into him.
I met him when I was shooting matches in Tampa, Florida. He had blonde hair, and other than the fact that he was very nice and did a hell of a job with his character, I really don't know him that well.
Now, of course, The Undertaker started in that territory too. There is that match of him and Brody online where Brody just demolishes him. Did you ever run into him when he was Mean Mark Callis?
I don't recall that I did.
In later years, what about WWE photography or anything?
Yeah, I shot him a few times. OVW, they would do a show in Louisville, Kentucky in cooperation with OVW, which at that time was the training center for WWE guys. And they've done a few big shows, and I was able to photograph Undertaker's matches a few times, but not really get to know him very well.
I see. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for your time. I hope we can have you on again sometime when I actually finish getting through your book. I've been very busy lately, but it does have great pictures. I know you have it too. Oops, I took the cover off.
Here it is.
It's falling off.
I got your back. I got your back. Here it is. I've got your back, and it's available on Amazon. But if you want to help me out, I make more money on the book if you buy it from me directly. Inbox me at Scott Romer, and I'll give you whatever information that you need to know. The book's $20 plus $5 shipping and handling. I will autograph the book personally for you. Devon, thank you very much. This was one of my goals, was to get on your show, and now I have to think of some other goals to do. So thank you so much for having me. Take it easy.
Thank you. And just for the fans, you did personally autograph my copy, so contact him directly on Facebook if you want a custom autograph. And as I said, I hope to have you on again. I think the fans have enjoyed all these stories, and I'll let you close this however you want, whatever you want to say to the fans.
Well, Devon, when you get a chance to read the book, I think you'll have more questions for me, and I would love to be on your book. I'm sorry, another interview with
you might make my book if you take pictures of me before I write it, which I probably won't write for another 5 years or so.
I would be glad to one day go to Canada and photograph you in a wrestling match or at an MMA match. But fans, thank you very much for listening to me. It's very encouraging to know that my story, that I'm telling my story. So thank you very much, all you fans, as well as you, Hannibal.